I'm not sure if there's a specific format for these posts, but I'm going to dive right in. I'm sharing this because I hope someone out there might understand what's been happening with me and my best friend. My name is Ethan, and my friend Aaron and I are urban explorers. For those who aren't familiar, that just means we enjoy exploring abandoned buildings. My favorites are places like water parks and amusement parks, while Aaron prefers creepier spots, like hospitals. We have a lot of fun, but usually don't believe in anything supernatural. We've been at this for almost 10 years, so we know the ropes, what to bring, how to avoid getting caught by security, and when to leave. Recently, I visited my brother in Virginia, where he just had a baby. I hadn't been able to make it for the birth, so I wanted to make it up to him. He lives in a small town called Holly Slopes, about 30 minutes from Richmond. It's a quiet place, but my brother mentioned an interesting spot nearby, an old abandoned mall called the Holly Slopes Mall. Built in the mid-80s by a wealthy timber family, it aimed to attract more people to the area. Unfortunately, it only lasted about 7 years before closing in 1987. I know this background isn't super relevant, but it helps organize my thoughts, and I find the history of these places adds to their allure. We decided to check out the mall on my last day there, right before heading to the airport for a late flight. We woke up early, packed our gear into the rental car, and said our goodbyes to my brother and his family. The mall was located on the outskirts of town, which I thought was odd. Usually, such structures are built centrally for easy access. It was surrounded by dense brush and trees, and a tall metal fence enclosed it. The entrance was blocked by a flimsy gate held shut with a chain and lock, but when Aaron pulled up, I discovered the latch wasn't even locked. This wasn't too surprising. Sometimes people stop caring about these places, and it often means less security, which was reassuring. We parked and entered the mall through the main entrance. It wasn't the largest mall we'd explored, but it was bigger than expected. The place felt like a time capsule, frozen in a dystopian version of the 80s. A massive hole in the roof let snow and elements in, and a tree had grown large enough to protrude through it. While Aaron was more focused on the exploration, I was interested in photography. I was snapping what I thought would be some great shots when I lost my camera. Well, I didn't lose it in the traditional sense. I knew exactly where it was, but I'll get to that later. During our exploration, I felt a strange sensation as if we were being watched. I heard distant sounds, glass crunching, fleeting glimpses of movement at the edges of my vision, but I chalked it up to my imagination. There was no sign of security, and I didn't think the police would bother checking on an abandoned building. After hanging out in the food court for a bit, we decided to head back to the car. On our way, we noticed a parking garage nearby. It looked like it had 5 levels but was mostly deserted. Aaron wanted to check it out, and since we hadn't spent as much time in the mall as we thought we would, I figured, why not? We drove up to the 4th floor, doing some donuts and joking about the rental car as Aaron attempted to mimic a scene from Fast and Furious. I was gripping the seat the entire time, worried about damaging the car. We returned to the ground floor and were about to leave when we spotted a ramp leading to a lower level. It seemed odd that a small mall would have such a large parking structure, so we decided to explore further. As we descended, the darkness grew more intense, and Aaron turned on the high beams. We drove around, finding nothing but gloom. To our surprise, we discovered another ramp leading to an even lower level. We laughed, thinking about how many subfloors there could possibly be. When we reached the 4th subfloor, we were astonished to see another incline leading to a 5th level. How could a small mall have a 10-level parking garage, including ground level? We were both bewildered. We pressed on to subfloor 5, where the darkness enveloped us completely, our headlights the only source of illumination. As we turned the corner, things took a strange turn. We sat in silence, looking at each other, unsure of what to say. Without further discussion, Aaron guided the car down the ramp to the next level. For 6 more stories, we drove in confusion, eventually finding ourselves 11 stories underground. None of it made sense. Aaron excitedly speculated that we might have stumbled upon a secret government base or a sprawling underground bunker, but he stopped mid-sentence when we saw something unexpected: a car parked with its headlights on. As we pulled up next to it, I rolled down the window, and the cold air from the parking structure filled the car, which was odd because it was a warm day outside. The other car was running, yet covered in dust, like it hadn't moved in years. After some hesitation, I got out to investigate. Inside the car, everything was dusty, and on the front seat was a bag with a bottle on top. The radio hummed softly with static, and the keys were still in the ignition. It felt wrong. Despite my unease, Aaron insisted we continue further. We descended another 12 levels, deeper into the structure. It was unsettling, and I told Aaron we should leave when he suddenly stopped the car. Ahead of us, in the dim light, was a horse. It stood there, lifeless and decaying, its skin hanging off its face, revealing bone beneath. Blood streaked the floor beneath it, trailing into the darkness. I wanted to leave immediately, but Aaron hesitated. After some back and forth, he finally agreed, and we started reversing back up toward the ground level. As we ascended, I noticed something odd though. We should have been heading up. The floors were still numbered in descending order. We should have been on floor B23, but the sign read B26. It didn't make sense. Aaron, confused, got out of the car to examine the sign. As I called for him to get back in, we both heard a voice, not ours, repeat my words from the darkness. Panicked, we locked the doors and drove on, deciding to keep going up, hoping the numbers would eventually make sense. As we climbed, strange things appeared. On one floor, a long dining table with two shadowy figures briefly illuminated by our headlights. On another, parked trucks, each seemingly occupied by someone, alive or dead. The eeriest was a floor that looked nothing like a parking structure, but more like a forest, with trees, grass, and a path leading to a small, distant cabin. We kept driving, unsure of what we would encounter next, desperate to find a way out. There was someone home, and smoke billowed from the chimney. Curiosity overcame my fear, and I rolled down the window. The sounds of crickets and a cool spring breeze filled the car. Aaron and I exchanged a brief glance before he exclaimed, "Nah, screw that," and drove further up the hill. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, we reached floor B46. I broke down in tears. The realization that we were lost underground with no way out was overwhelming. I felt the weight of every floor above pressing down on me. Aaron tried to comfort me, offering explanations, but none made sense in the maze of the parking garage. He began driving again, turning around and heading down to B47, B48, B49. He stopped the car, turned back, and yelled out in frustration, his voice echoing around us in the darkness. Then, shockingly, his shout bounced back, resonating through the parking structure. The windows shook, the car trembled, and then it shut off, leaving us in pitch black. The only light came from my phone, which I had plugged in and was charging. I turned on the flashlight just as Aaron desperately tried to restart the car, but there was nothing, not even a click. Then I heard a voice, seemingly from inside the car, "Get back in the vehicle." Miraculously, the car roared back to life without him even turning the key. Whatever was down here wanted us to leave, and we wanted to get out too, but we didn't know how. Aaron put the car in reverse and sped up the slope, ignoring the floor numbers. He drove 6 or 7 stories before I spotted something hanging in the darkness. Each floor now had a faint light. I managed to calm Aaron enough to point it out. He stopped on the next floor, and we could see a door illuminated by an emergency light above it. It was our only chance. He parked in front of the stairway, and we rushed out of the vehicle. Aaron flung the door open, and we raced up the steps. As we climbed, I saw the number B57. I felt a surge of hope as we moved faster, encouraged by the descending numbers. For 20 stories, we practically ran, but around B30, we began to tire. We were still moving up, but exhaustion set in. I noticed for the first time that while the lights above us were on, the ones below us were turning off. When I reached Aaron, who had stopped in front of me, I saw what had caught his attention, a figure huddled in the corner at the top of the next flight of stairs. The person had their head buried in their knees, trembling. Their clothes looked old and dusty, perhaps a lost homeless person. I gently called out, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" Aaron scoffed, saying we didn't need help from that person. He charged up the stairs, but when he got close, he braced himself against the railing, peering at the figure. I followed cautiously, but the person remained motionless, muttering something I couldn't decipher. We pressed on, leaving the figure behind. As I reached the top of the next flight, I was startled to see the withered face of an old man staring at me with piercing blue eyes. I was silent as I stepped closer and turned the corner, only to find Aaron fixated on the next set of stairs. The figure was there again, in the same position, hidden face and all. We exchanged looks of disbelief, but Aaron insisted we ignore it and keep going. We continued up, and each floor we reached, the figure was there, watching us silently. It was bizarre, but everything about this experience felt surreal. Finally, we arrived at B1, and this time, the man wasn't in the corner. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was a good sign. We ascended to floor 0, relieved to see light shining through the cracks of the door. Aaron paused for a moment, pushed the door open, and began to laugh. I followed him through, but the cold of the parking structure returned, and before us were the bright headlights of our car, exactly where we'd left it on B58. I was at a loss for words. Aaron stumbled back into the stairwell and collapsed on the floor, troubled and broken. I urged him to keep going, that we could make it out together, but he was too exhausted and defeated. His once steadfast demeanor crumbled into despair, so I decided to check out the next floor on my own. I rushed up the stairs and felt a sudden warmth. I could see the sunlight through the door, and I knew it was different. It was daylight. Bursting through the door, I was momentarily blinded by the bright sun after so long in darkness. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust, but we had made it. We were free. I ran back down to tell Aaron, but he was gone. I rushed out into the parking garage, calling for him, but there was no response. Panic surged through me as I began to head back down the steps, but stopped cold. I couldn't go back down there again. Then I saw him on the top step of the floor below, sitting in the corner, hands clasped around his knees, staring at me. I called out to him, descending the stairs, but when I reached the bottom, he was gone. I glanced down at the next flight, and there he was again, watching. I couldn't go down any further. I begged him to come to me, to leave with me, but he just stared silently. I promised him I would return. Tears streamed down my face as I turned and fled the parking structure, leaving my best friend behind to save myself because I was too terrified. I ran across the parking lot, through the doors, and onto the street. Finally, my phone got a signal, and I called the police. I tried to explain what had happened. I knew it sounded insane, but I was honest with them. They searched the parking garage, the whole area, but found nothing. They told me there were no sublevels like I described. How could that be? I was tested for drugs and alcohol and fined for trespassing. When my brother arrived to pick me up, I explained everything, but he didn't know who Aaron was. They had been friends since childhood. My brother swore he had no memory of him, nor did his wife or kids. I searched for evidence of Aaron, but all the photos on my phone were gone. My camera was still in the car, yet there was no trace of him online. I didn't make him up. I don't do drugs or drink, and I have no history of mental illness. I can't erase 20 years of friendship from my mind. I've been seeing a therapist and started medication, but nothing has helped. Something feels very wrong. This world feels off, like I stepped into a life that isn't mine. Every day, it becomes clearer that I need to go back. I don't know what I hope to find in this post, maybe just to share my story, to let people know I existed, that Aaron existed. Perhaps to find someone who knows what happened to us or anything about the Holly Slopes. Somehow, I need to go back. I need to find Aaron. We have to get back in the car.